sometimes I can't hear people on the phone, and I say it's Joe, and then I say Joe Snowdrop. Oh yeah, we know who you are. Somehow, the idea of getting pollen from one plant and putting it on another plant isn't on the top of people's list. They've got other things to do. And I really sometimes have to really push myself to actually do it. But once I've done it, the results are so amazing.
I think you should name a plant Alan Gray, because I want to buy it.
You want to buy it?
I want to buy lots.
Okay, well, let's see if I've got something that's worth £1,000.
Yes, come on.
Hello and welcome to episode 34 of Talking Dirty. Over at East Ruston Old Vicarage, looking sensational in scarlet, just after his birthday, in fact, it's Alan, Edward, Herbert Gray, our happy and ever so handsome horticulturalist.
What a very good handle he's got.
Well, I say thank you, Emma. I didn't know you'd noticed. In actual fact, over in Cambridgeshire, we have the eminent, the effervescent, the ever wonderful Thordis Maria Sophia Fridriksson.
Fantastico.
Well, this is the thing. So our guest this week is an absolute inspiration. The woman behind the powerhouse behind the Pottery company, Emma Bridgewater, which is often so botanically inspired. And if you've seen their new collection, you'll know it's just a celebration of such wonderful, beautiful spring wildflowers and summer wildflowers. Also closely linked to the National Garden Scheme. She is a massive fan of gardening and all things planty. Emma Bridgewater, do you have any middle names to bring to the party?
Well, mine is a rather restrained middle name. I'm Emma Mary Bridgewater.
Oh, it's a lovely name. Do you know where they came from? Do you know why they were picked?
Oh, Mum said when she and my dad chose Emma for me, there were no other Emmas, and she was very much in thrall to the rather contrary heroine, the Jane Austen heroine Emma Woodhouse, and she said she knew I'd have a terribly original name. Huh. That wasn't true, was it? Thereafter, almost every family had to have an Emma. But that's nice. And no, I don't know where the Mary came from. I think she just liked it.
They must be quite pleased that despite the fact that many people have been called Emma ever after you were named Emma, the name Emma Bridgewater is quite something to be a name where it almost feels like they can't be separated. It's like Hollywood actors where their name is just their first and their second name together. You are one of those people.
Oh, well, it's quite a thought, that, isn't it? I have to say, I think the name has been a massive help. It sounds, people often assume it's an old family business that I resurrected or something. It's got a very good Industrial Revolution sort of sound to it, hasn't it? Which is all to the good.
But Emma Bridgewater has become the generic name for your kind of Chinese pottery. It is what it is. It's you, the person that we're talking to today, and it is all of your wares. And I went on your website this morning and I had a look just to catch up and all the rest of it, because you regularly send me emails and things like that. You probably don't know this, but the business does.
Yeah, it isn't me personally. So.
I was so captivated with, I'll just tell you, it's probably ridiculous, but dandelions and insects. I just love that. And I saw a butter dish. And you'll never guess it was so fortuitous, because my cat jumped on the worktop and swiped the butter dish off and crashed it to the floor the other day because he's mad to get the butter. So I just said, I'll get one of your butter dishes.
Oh,
I can't have it.
Oh,
can't have it.
All gone.
Yes.
All gone. And we've had an astonishing week. We launched that collection this Monday and we've pretty much sold out. We held back a bit of Mother's Day stuff. It's extraordinary. It's very, very, very big at the moment.
I think it just goes to show the popularity and the right thing, and it's the right thing at the right time, isn't it? It's a nerve that you've struck with people, and it's the same with horticulture. With going back to gardening in lockdown, people want those nice natural things around them in lockdown, and I think Emma Bridgewater is part of that. Dare I say?
Well, thank you very much. I hope to be kind of relevant and in touch with my lovely customers, and I know that, like me, they're going for lots of walks, and suddenly, whether your grandmother, as mine did, kind of she pressed my face into the wildflowers, she really made me learn them when I was little. But whether you had that bossy granny or not, a wonderful granny, I think everybody is super aware of the natural world. And last spring and summer was so ravishing, wasn't it? We had such great weather that sort of nature laid on this incredible sort of, it was amazing sort of show, wasn't it? I feel as we all went for our walks, it was like there was some sort of magic thing going on, one beautiful day after another. Certainly here in North Norfolk, it seemed to be that.
I think also it was the fact that as people were probably forced to stay together in their bubbles or in their little groups, they were forced to go outside, and they were forced to, they were not necessarily forced, but they did look. They looked because they were there and they had the time.
Exactly.
And I mean, when I first went to school, we had nature walks. Mum and Dad on a Sunday afternoon, we're going for a walk, and we used to walk all over the farm. And we, you know, we were continually being taught to look for, I don't know, ladybirds or caterpillars or whatever.
Yeah.
And, you know, you'd stand in front of a bush with Father, and Father would say, I can see 5 ladybirds. Can you count them? And until you could count them, you weren't allowed to move on.
Well, exactly. Those, well, he sounds quite like my granny, you know, that strict and very keen that we should understand how wonderful it is and how varied and what a lot's going on out there. And we've had David Attenborough telling us exactly the same lesson, sort of all of us together. He's been doing the farm walk that your dad gave you, hasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. Emma, what would your favourite flower be at the moment? I have to say at the moment because I suspect it probably changes throughout the year, but what would it be at the moment?
You're so right about it being seasonal. Well, I'm poised. The blackthorn all coming out is pretty bloody lovely, but the snowdrops are, as they go, you sort of in a terribly callous way, hurry away. What's next? What's next? And I can't wait for the blossom. You know how there's that succession of blossom. There's the early things like the blackthorn that flower on the wood, and then it gets better and better and better and better until you get to the apple blossom at the end of May.
You know what Beth Chatto called the blackthorn blossom? She called it the blackthorn winter. Because invariably it coincided with a period of harsh spring weather. Normally, you know, those nasty easterlies that burn everything. But that was the blackthorn winter, wasn't it?
God, we've really had that last week.
It is very cheery.
It was, and of course I ran out of central heating oil to celebrate that extraordinarily cold snap. I was like, it was, I don't know what it was like here. It was like the 1950s. I was trudging about in ski trousers, wearing every jersey I own, and wishing that I had many more wood-burning stoves. I've only got 2, and I couldn't really get a proper fug up at all. It was freezing.
Oh no. When it comes to your inspiration, like quite clearly there we've seen there's, you know, going for walks and getting inspiration from what you see around you. We associate you with all these wonderful botanical prints, also of course your polka dots and your dog breeds and your wonderful cities of the world. To go right back to the beginning, when it was you sort of at home making those first initial ones, was it immediately kind of botanical? When did the kind of the plant-based inspiration strike?
Okay, I've got something to show you just right here. This lovely, lovely plate was on my mum's dresser, and I always loved it. And it's hand painted in a Welsh pottery.
Is it Weems?
No, it's not. What happened was after Weems closed down, you know, that was the great sort of Edwardian middle class must have. And it closed, I think he was called Karl Nicola, the Czech painter who was the sort of driving force at Weems. Possibly he died, it declined quite quickly, but this guy there was a Welsh painter called Shufflebottom. I can never forget his name.
No.
And it's called, I can't remember, and I can't say the Welsh, it's something like Clonelly, the pottery that made this lovely, lovely, very much Weems inspired freehand roses. And I've always aspired to that. It seems to me you kind of need look no further. So when the thought of China for my mum, I mean, it was specifically her birthday that that prompted it one year. But it was the thought of her kitchen. And she had always had a big mismatched dresser full of china that she liked. And that rosy plate was always on it. And somehow that's always had some kind of central role. And I did quite a lot of my very first kind of pummeling my imagination and kind of working out what I really wanted to say with a friend, a cousin who actually lives just near here and has a very beautiful walled garden. And the figs there were a massive inspiration. I've got a funny sort of little miniature version there, which I like very, very much. And that was quite early on. It wasn't the first pattern I did, but very nearly. But the truth is, people who make lovely china have always put horticultural things on. The ancient Greeks put lovely twirly vines, which are a sort of, I mean, they're just a perennially lovely motif because of all those tendrils, as well as the grapes being beautiful. But I think it's, isn't it inevitable? Isn't it natural? Isn't it wonderful to put not just flowers, but also, for me, fruit and veg? I love that slightly eccentric thing of a lot of vegetables.
So do I. I think that's marvelous. I love the peas. I love your peas and the did you do something with asparagus? I think you did.
Oh yes, and there was a rather, my best recently was a great big red cabbage looking like an enormous rose.
Yeah.
So that's Matthew's lovely watercolors applied as a litho, whereas, you know, as a print.
Yeah,
and it's applied by hand. It isn't a kind of robotic arm that sticks his reproduced painting on. But these, the spongeware, is every single print done by hand, every single motif. So no two are the same. And that was what I loved. And it's the sort of perfect imperfection of nature that one's always after. And I like the very sort of spontaneous feeling of spongeware.
But it certainly has that. I mean, I think that the purposeful imperfection, if you like, is almost perfection. You understand me? Because nature is imperfect all the time.
Well, exactly. Anything perfect is boring.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's why I'm not perfect.
Me too. Anyway, right, the said Granny, the very influential, instructive, wildflower-loving Granny, was also a great sewer. And I remember making an enormous crocheted bedspread with her when I broke my leg, aged about 8. And at the end, she who was very exacting and had made me do it really carefully and precisely. So you can't tell looking at the bedspread, which I've got here, which were her squares and which were mine. But then I remember she put in an imperfection. She said, oh, it's an Arabic tradition. You must always put in a deliberate mistake, because you've got to be very clear that you must never try to imitate the perfection of God's creation. You must always acknowledge your humanity and your imperfection, which it's really stayed with me, that. So I get a bit annoyed when, in the way we've got, I mean, there are more than 70 girls doing hand decorating, and they are infinitely better than I ever was at it. And I sometimes say, we're getting too neat, too perfect. Come on, we have to remember that this is hand done. So for me, the sort of, the perfection of imperfection is what I really love.
Well, I think it's absolutely marvelous, but I mean, you don't take it to the extent that Mason's Ironstone China did way back in the 1900s, when they would have little children of 7 and 8 decorating their plates and things, and they can be beautifully blobby. But I mean, I say blobby, I mean really blobby. So you can almost, not see what the subject is supposed to be. And you get the runs.
That's a different thing, isn't it? And we're not so keen on child labour.
No, quite.
That doesn't happen so much these days.
How terribly civilized.
No, it's an interesting thing in that I probably am the person who's scuffling around in the back of Richard Scott's shop, hoping to find the more blobby things. I really love that. And there is a really interesting thing that happens with selling on the internet rather than in a shop. we've just closed our 2 London shops for good, which is really sad. But I always found it very instructive watching people going through the shelves and picking the ones that they liked. And I felt that was how it should be. But if you sell off a photograph on a website, something seen on Instagram or whatever, people are quite disconcerted if what arrives doesn't look pretty much like that. And I get their point. You know, they haven't seen the array and made the choice. So we've kind of created an interesting conundrum there, and we're trying to build into the marketing a bit more information and reminding people and showing how it's decorated.
I think that's enormously important, because I mean, sadly, you've just said that you've closed both your London shops. Completely understandable. It's the financial situation that we find ourselves in because of the lockdown and because of the dreadful period in our lives that we're going through. But don't you find that? Do you find it for yourself? I know I find it for me that the process of actually going to a shop and looking and touching and seeing and turning it over and feeling it.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to miss that dreadfully. I mean, I don't know what you think, but I mean, poor God, London is so awful. The empty streets break your heart. It's so peculiar. And of course, it's not going to come back immediately, but it will come back. But I don't know. I mean, lots of changes to how we shop had already taken hold, and the pandemic was just a sort of final push, really. But I think there will. Everything's cyclical, isn't it? I think it'll come back.
Yes.
But I mean, what we find is, before the pandemic, we were, whereas our London street traffic was dwindling, the factory shop, with people making it a deliberate trip, sometimes from quite a long way away, those numbers were going up and up. And I think you've kind of got to make it more interesting. I bet people come to your unbelievable garden and shop like mad if you offer them the right retail, because you've made them excited and sort of fired up their imaginations. And I think there's something that we have to learn as retailers.
With your business, I always get the feeling that although it's grown exponentially, that it's always sort of, you've retained such a kind of a close eye on it, and it's retained all of the original ideas that were behind it and all the original things you wanted to achieve. None of that has been lost. But I wonder, when it's such a big machine and it's just this massive concern, do you ever have an idea for something and there are other people who say, I'm not sure sprouts are a good idea, or something like that?
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, we're now, as you say, it's a big sophisticated setup, and the product development team are fantastic. I sort of aim to inspire them rather than say you must do this. I don't think it ever comes down to you must. If I fail to inspire them, I can feel there's probably a flaw in the sprouts idea. In fact, I did prevail, and we put sprouts on a teapot one Christmas. It was a sort of qualified success. I like a joke in pottery myself a lot, and I felt that I sometimes think it's important that there are things that aren't there for mass sales. They're there. They're there because I feel they should be. But sort of between us, I think we're quite good at squaring that circle. I probably do want to go a bit further, a bit faster, and I want more less. My tastes are probably a little more minimal than the majority of our customers, who really love a lot of decorating. And so there's a sort of constant evolution and a constant conversation between us and the customers, and between us in the studio and with marketing. And so it's a kind of, it's a very dynamic, alive process, which I really, really relish. And it feels as if the decisions that we come to, I'm normally really happy about. I think when you're having a heated, let's not say row, but heated conversation about whether I've gone too far. I mean, for example, I don't think that the head of product thought so much of dandelions when she first heard the idea. And when we started to sample it, I think she was thinking, again, maybe just on 2 or 3 pieces. But I pressed my point, which is that I felt that as I thought about it in that thoughtful walk way that we were talking about earlier, I realized that they're amazing they're very nectar rich. So our beleaguered insects benefit from them enormously. And as I thought about Brexit and the fix we're in, all the difficulties we're encountering, there's something about the dogged, opportune sort of cheerfulness of dandelions, the way they'll thrive in any little corner. I thought, come on, guys, this is our national emblem. There's something really important about it. And we shouldn't always think in sort of big grand terms about peonies and roses and sort of flashy flowers. It's really great to look at this weed that is mercilessly rooted out by most gardeners and say, hang on, stop, look, let some of them live and admire what they stand for.
I think it's that dandelions are one of the plants that thrive along our roadside, our verges.
Exactly.
And there's nothing more cheerful in late March, beginning of April, middle of April, than just driving out or going somewhere or walking and just seeing these sheets of this brilliant golden sunshine yellow. Yeah. It is just so cheerful. And anybody that says the thing against dandelions, I mean, I could not live without dandelions. What would I feed my tortoise?
Well, exactly. And I was planning to do it this summer. I forgot to do it last year. Sometimes one manages it by mistake, putting some flower pots over a few plants and managing to blanch some leaves in a rather groovy French way.
Yes. You see, that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because that's something that an awful lot of people probably don't know about. I mean, it's probably written about somewhere in an obscure book or something, or maybe Elizabeth David touched on it.
Jeffrey Grigson might have told us about it, mightn't he, all those years ago?
Yes, he might, or Jane may have touched on it as well.
Yes.
She probably used it in her cookery books. So it could well have been documented. I'm sure it is, but it's one of those things that people don't think about. So anybody out there, go and get an upturned terracotta pot, put it over your dandelions, and when the leaves are blanched, use them in a salad. They're much like an endive, aren't they, really?
Oh, absolutely. It's just like being in Paris. Suddenly you're having a very, very lovely, different tasting salad. I became, my gardening obsession last year really was herbs. It was realizing just how you transform your life by growing lots and lots of herbs. Now, I feel that was my biggest success. That and kale, which was astonishingly good. It was the plant that went on giving. I ate tons and tons. I absolutely love it. I couldn't have been happier. It was the most lucky bit of work. It was the first thing I planted, and it was just one row, and it went on and on and on. I couldn't kill it off.
Yeah.
And I know from, your wonderful pottery with tomatoes on it, obviously there's a lot of your work that gets inspired directly from your garden. What is your garden like? How much of it do you give over to edibles? How much is it ornamentals? Do you like to kind of do a lot of propagating? Are you more about sort of these perennials or shrubs or whatever? Tell us about it. Paint us a picture of your garden.
Now listen, brace yourself. Full disclosure. I used to be, but I am no longer, married to a tremendously good gardener. Matthew is, and as a partnership, we made several quite amazing gardens. And the one I left him to is spectacular. So it's a really marvellous setup in Oxfordshire. And he'll do wonderful things there. Now, I was always the one waving my hands around and saying cherry orchards here and avenues there. And why don't we plant all the roses in the world here for picking? We had this great realization that there are lots and lots of rather pretty roses that you don't particularly want to look at for beauty. You want them planted out in rows in a vegetable garden for fierce picking, because they just to the exact extent that nobody really wants to look at a blue moon in their garden in a rose bed or something. When it's picked in profusion in a jug, it's the most glamorous, extraordinary thing. So there was sort of a huge, big scale, and Matthew's a very good plantsman. But the truth is, he was doing the plantsman work, and now I'm on my own in a much smaller garden, and I'm really lazy. So it took me some time to rev myself up to dig. I finally dug probably in April last year. maive and a bit of rough grass. It was tremendously hard work. And I was so proud of myself. That was my first proper gardening on my own ever. It doesn't remotely live up to Matthew's standards, but in a way I'm rather enjoying the sort of kicking back feeling of doing exactly what I wanted, which is having lots and lots of herbs, managing to find 2 little hot spots that I could make tomatoes work in. That, as aforementioned, great success with kale, and I made my sweet pea wigwams. And it was such a weird summer to be gardening from scratch because he hadn't even left me any tools here. There was one very bendy fork and a wheelbarrow with a puncture, and everyone was closed to begin with. So I was improvising hard, and one of those I'd stop whenever I was driving and saw things by the side of the road. So I wound up with some jolly peculiar things growing here that people had been selling their excess of by the road. But it was, and I don't know, I can't say that it's going to be a sort of, that I'm progressing swiftly to tremendously good high standards. But I know that I'm finding my own way. And I don't want to I will never make a sort of great, marvelous destination garden, I don't think. But it is making me terrifically happy. And I think my biggest thrill has been, I've got a lot of geraniums here. And in fact, I want you to put me straight on the difference between pelargoniums and geraniums. I have no idea. But
I can do it very quickly.
Okay,
I can do it very quickly. Pelargoniums are pelargoniums and geraniums are geraniums. Because
how did I not know that?
Geraniums are hardy herbaceous perennials, and I don't know how pelargoniums ever became known as geraniums, but I think the definition was between the regals and the uniques and the zonals. Now, the zonals have circular leaves, often with a wavy edge, and they have a zone of darker green or brown on the leaf.
Yes.
That is what was called a geranium. The ones with the crinkled leaves and the slightly serrated edges were either regals or unique pelargoniums. Uniques have smaller flowers than regals, and regals were bred from the uniques, making them so-called improved, like the Spencer sweet peas were improved from the grandifloras.
Yes.
Not necessarily better, but bigger. But I think and that's the difference between the two. But if you get a unique pelargonium, which has smaller flowers than the regals, and you get it to tree-like proportions, which is how it grows naturally in South Africa, it makes the most fantastic plant. And they were so revered early last century that the cuttings were referred to as, is there a daughter on that partaking?
Oh, how lovely.
Cuttings became a daughter.
I'm mad about, well, I would immediately feel like that about them. I have been swapping cuttings with friends, and it seems to me it's the most marvelous treat in that they've gone on. I mean, I've got 2 bay windows, which I filled in thinking that the children would lie around reading books. That didn't happen. But instead, now they're full of geraniums, and it is just, I've got a mixture.
Yeah.
Some of them are flowered all through the winter.
Well, it's obviously bright enough because day length is the crucial factor in keeping them flowering. So if they're as bright as they possibly can be, and a bay window would give them that. I mean,
exactly.
It's marvelous that they do that. And they're so cheery. A friend of mine sent me a picture the other day on Instagram and said, "What do you think of my conservatory?" And I thought, what are all those pink things there? Are they cyclamen? And so she said, "No, they're my geraniums. They're still flowering."
They're that good. Yes. I mean, it seems to me, yes, some people say, oh, it's no good, you just cut them right back and forget about them for the winter. But I didn't have the heart to do that. I was so proud of them that I've just let them all carry on. And when
providing you tidy their dead and dying foliage, I think the older they get, I mean, there comes a time when we have to manipulate them to make them fit in with the size of the area we've got. But they've become almost tree-like, which is to be revered, I feel.
Yes, it's marvelous. I feel very, very excited about that. And I think I'd also, I've got a terrific amaryllis just coming. I mean, just in the most wonderful nick. And I also planted a lot of narcissi, and they've been coming out indoors and smelling lovely. And I had the best hyacinths I think I've ever known.
I have to tell you something. You might not think you're much of a gardener, but you're sounding pretty good to me.
Well, I've been sort of, it's hit and miss, and I have been loving it. But that's very,
Yeah.
I mean, for you to hear you say that, I'm going to try harder this summer. It's going to get that's lovely. It has, I mean, I think I've been longing to get at it for myself, and I expect I will. I mean, the same bossy grandmother was a fantastic gardener, and she made one after another marvellous gardens, down to a little tiny one in Cly was her last home. There was just a little yard, but every single thing you wanted. And in fact, one of the plants that I'd always wanted to grow, I found it's so exciting. I discovered it here. We cut back some viburnum that was sort of taking over one corner of the garden. And then I was walking past last winter. I thought, what on earth is that? It's a Chimonanthus. And the winter sweet had just been sheltered in this sort of overgrown shrubbery at the bottom of the garden. So the thrill of, and Granny's thing was, you must have every single day of the year, you've got to be able to make a little bunch, or a large bunch in the summer. And Chimonanthus is it's one of those. Yeah, and so December, January, when it's pretty hard to find things to pick. Some twigs of that and bringing them indoors. And I also love the trick when you're walking of picking. I mean, like I did some probably entirely ill-timed pruning, but it was driving me wild, of a pear tree and an apple tree and a plum. And I put the branches in a jug in the hall and they all came out, which that thrills me so much. I love.
I've just done it with forsythia. We have a weeping forsythia on one of the walls and north walls of the wall garden. And I brought some branches in, and Sally, who's my housekeeper, she said, "What are you doing with those old twigs?" I said, "They're coming into the house." "Well, there's nothing on them. What? A week later, we're festooned in lovely yellow flowers, and she's biting her lip, as they say. No,
yeah, exactly. But she's possibly still not that convinced. It is there's that funny thing when some people they put a beady eye on that sort of thing. They're longing to get it outside. They don't think it should be in. But I think, my mum was very keen on this, and she, on a walk at about this time of year, it happens sort of in the next few weeks, we were walking on Port Meadow in Oxford, where I grew up, and where she moved after my parents divorced, and there's that incredible smell of witch hazel, and she picked some of the branches, and we took them home, and they were in a bunch in a jug in the drawing room, which was quite a cold room most of the week, but they came out just ahead of out of doors. She knew which was the tree, and the smell as they come out is like incense. It's extraordinary, really, really marvelous trick. And in fact, I read a really good anecdote about that. They call it balm of Gilead in America, and it's a poplar. It seems to come in many different kinds, and has an extraordinary sort of witchy smell. It's absolutely delicious and mysterious. And you think, why can't I buy it in diptyque? And Alan Bennett wrote somewhere that he was eating out of doors somewhere in France, and there was this amazing smell, and he was sure it was the waiter who he was asking a lot of leading questions about his aftershave, and somebody said, "No, it's not him, it's that tree over there." I love that, don't you?
I do love scent in the garden. I don't have anywhere near enough of it, but I was up at the Cambridge University Botanic Garden the other day, and I was walking towards their winter garden, and it was like walking into a wall of Daphne Bellua. It was just like a wall of scent. It was obviously the breeze was drifting towards me, and you just wanted to sort of luxuriate in it. It was glorious.
Yes, the winter scented things are such a mystery. And why is Hamamelis or Daphne, or who are they wafting all that expensive perfume about for?
Well, they're wafting it because they're actually people that they actually want to capture, i.e. the insects, the pollinators, are very few and far between. So they have to cast their net as wide as they possibly can. And that's why we have the great gusts of that. And it's often quite a sharp scent, isn't it, at that time of year?
Very distinctive, yes. Yeah. Very strong.
Yeah. First time I ever smelt Daphne odora Aureomarginata, I think it was at Lanhydrock House down in Cornwall. And she found me before I found her. And I was literally around one side of the house and she was around the other side of the house, if you see what I mean.
Literally,
And I
right.
literally followed my nose.
Yeah.
And there they had a plant on either side of a doorway. And what did I do? I came home and copied it because it was such a wonderful idea.
It's a really
What a
good
well-
idea. Yeah.
what a
Lovely
well-
idea. Mm.
Hmm.
Lovely.
Emma, do
Lovely.
you have a garden there at your factory, do you not?
We do. And it's pretty marvelous. It's just a little walled yard that was the electricity sub-generating station for the factory, which was built by the Meakin brothers, and we bought it from Johnson's in '96. And I think that that particular bit of electrical history was already history. It was mostly sort of people hoid their rubbish over the wall, and it was a sort of dead spot. And Matthew and I said, come on, surely we could use this. And we talked them into sort of getting rid of all the old, there were lots of great big old sort of Dalek looking machines. and we got very lucky in that we planted some pear trees and there was some rather rudimentary gardening. And then Arthur Parkinson made his way to us via Sarah Raven. She's a friend, and he became a great friend, and he did that garden for 2 years. And we miss him sorely, but the accounts department do not miss the bulbs bill, which was unbelievable. He was very persuasive, and Matthew entirely swayable to his plans, and it was gorgeous and wild. And anyone who saw it, I think really, really was knocked over by it. And it's lovely now, but it's a bit more reasonable. I mean, it's a bit more sort of, and meanwhile the trees have matured, the pear trees, and it's very, very lovely having somewhere. Well, the staff use it a lot. I love seeing people perched on the little walls when there's a lovely great big bench, chatting. It feels like an oasis in the city, and that we do need an oasis in life, don't we?
It must have been interesting. Obviously, you've loved gardening for so long. You were introduced to it by your grandparents. It's been a lifelong thing. But to be getting so hands-on, for it all to coincide with the pandemic and have a lot of your kind of garden centres and things closed, a lot of people then started ordering in, loads. All of the seed companies, all of the plant selling companies who did mail order were inundated. You could hardly get hold of anything. But did you find yourself sort of, I don't know, succumbing to the charms of various plants and things online? Were you able to get hold of stuff?
No, I mean, my confession earlier on was sort of it, really. I bought what I could find, and I quite liked that scavenger. I've got a bit of an obsession with that, in a way, making a great thing about it and having lots of sort of urgent needs of it's got to be exactly this. I was pleased to do it first with what came to hand. There seemed to be something right about that. I can feel it. I mean, Sarah's lovely catalogue just came through, and I can hardly control myself. So I think I am going to succumb. But last year I didn't. I just rumbled along, and when the garden centres opened up, I dashed in too late. All the seeds, they'd seen, some crafty person had managed to get in there before they were open. There was nothing left. It was desperate.
And I tell you what, Emma, that made us all, I mean, us included here, because places where we often buy fillers for summer pots and things like that from, they had nothing left. And so it made us all think on our feet, and we had to make do with what we had. And it was very much going back to that kind of wartime mentality in a funny sort of way, is make do and mend and get on with it. And I was quite surprised with what we achieved. And
I wish I'd seen it.
Used a grass and lots of our pots because I had a lot of it. I wouldn't have used it if I hadn't had to, but because I had to, visitors to the garden said, "Gosh, that's wonderful. We'd never have thought of that." And it was a funny sort of sensation because it was an idea that was forced on me, and it worked.
Yeah. Well, that old saw, necessity being the mother of invention, is true, isn't it? And you've got such a fantastic eye that you'd, and the idea that you've just, there's something that I've got a lot of and I've got a great big gap. How am I going to make that something be visually dramatic?
Yes.
Well, you're definitely the man for that challenge. Definitely. I back you every time.
It's funny how things change as well, because I've realised that I'm quite lazy and I spend quite a lot of money on those little compostable pots every year because I find they're handy to prick out into and then plant on. And I realised last year when I couldn't get hold of lots of them that little cut down toilet roll tubes worked very well in their stead.
Yes. Yes.
So now I've been hoarding up toilet roll tubes, much to my other half's great upset, throughout the last sort of 6 months or so, and I have a mountain of them in my little kind of potting shed type thing, former dog kennel, current potting shed. And so I'm looking forward to using cut down toilet roll tubes. And I was in the garden centre the other day and I'd picked up a big stack of these pots. I thought, no, I can save myself a little bit of money, use my toilet rolls.
Yeah.
You can even get, and I think Sarah sells them, Emma, those little kits where you can make biodegradable flower pots from newspaper. So your daily newspaper can then be turned into a flower pot, which is recycled and goes back into the ground to give another tree some sustenance to grow and produce more paper.
I like that. I tend to have used most of my newspaper lighting the fire. But
well, we do too.
But yes, I've got an awful lot of such pots as I accumulated last year. Do I have to should I be very clean with them? Should they all be scrubbed out a lot before I reuse them all?
It's there's a way of doing it, and there's the way we do it. If you do what the textbooks tells you, of course you'll take an old tin bath, zinc bath or whatever outside on the freezing cold day, and you'll fill it full of water, and you'll wash and scrub all your pots and dry them. If you're lazy or you're busy, then you won't. And I don't think it necessarily matters, because all you need is a brush in one hand, the pot in the other, and a quick brush to get rid of any old soil and things. And normally that would be all right.
That'll do.
There's every possibility that you could harbour disease in there. But,
I just wondered about the dreaded, is there some sort of mouldy problem if I...
Well, put it this way, there could be, but 9 times out of 10 there isn't.
There isn't. Okay, that's very reassuring. Thank you, sir.
I think it also depends where you're going to put them, because I did find last year I'd been a little lazy on the washing front, and I think 1 or 2 of my pots in the heated propagator, because it was this warm, moist situation,
yes.
It encouraged it all. But I think in lots of other places it wouldn't matter. But if you're going to stick things in a heated propagator, I think what I've learned is maybe to be a bit more spick and span.
Those are the ones.
Maybe.
Yes. Yeah, I know. That makes sense, actually, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Now, you said that Sarah Raven catalogue had turned up. So are you building up a list of what we call FLOMO, which is our talking dirty sort of word, our term for this feeling that is basically my whole life, this feeling of desperately wanting to grow things? And because I've got this tiny suburban garden, I mostly can't grow them. But it turns out with 32 acres over at East Ruston Old Vicarage, Alan is living a life of FLOMO as well. So are you building up
size of garden is no object here, don't you? But I think that I do recognise wanting what you can't quite do, and I'm pining for more fruit trees. That's probably my biggest want. And there are several planted in this garden, and through thick and they've hung on by their toenails, poor things. It's such a very, very, very thin soil, and very free draining. So goodness knows how they've survived. But so I dream about groves of blossom and cherry orchards all over again, and I can't do that, and that makes me want it more. So I think that FLOMO thing is definitely the thing you can't have, isn't it? I mean, I would like the whole house draped in roses.
I was thinking about what you said about roses a little while ago, and I remember reading somewhere that somebody wrote about roses as being the most beautiful flower on the ugliest of plants. And
yes, absolutely.
That is true. I mean, we plant masses of perennials amongst our roses, so they disguise the bits that you don't want to spray and you don't want to look at, and just see the flowers. And that's, but that makes for a slightly messy garden, but that's the way I like to garden. I don't want it to be too regimented.
No. The old-fashioned rose garden, we don't aspire to anymore, do we?
No, we don't. It's a monoculture, and monocultures become boring, and they also become disease-ridden. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But I think I like the look of climbers, climbing roses more than anything else.
Yes.
But this spot here is not very conducive to roses. It's pretty windy, as you can imagine, just on the coast. And I've got some shelter. There's a great big stand of ilex trees, home oaks at the end of the garden, which is sort of just right at the end of the garden, which is very nice, but it casts a big shadow in the mornings. It's sort of...
You know what they say, Emma? Life's a bitch and then you marry one.
And then you get divorced.
Yes.
You get divorced and he takes the gardening tools away with him.
I mean, that really is too much. You can't take the gardening tools.
It was so funny. There was one gardening glove, the wonkiest fork ever, and a broken wheelbarrow. And that was what I had for gardening kit. And he'd literally just said, oh, she won't need any of them, and taken them all away. But never mind. It's all fine. And I'm completely happy now.
So, Alan, I feel like Emma needs, seeing as she's managed to get through a year with one gardening glove, a deflated wheelbarrow and a wonky fork, I feel like we need to give her something back. So she's got this site. Are there any plants that are springing to mind? Are there roses that will cope well, regardless of the wind, the windy situation, the coastal situation?
Well, I would go straight away to David Austin roses because I love the shape of their roses.
Yeah.
And they're relatively, they're being bred to be as disease-free as you'll probably ever get a rose to be. The one good thing about where you are, Emma, is in actual fact the breeze, because the breeze blows the blessed fungus stuff away and everything else. So
that's very encouraging.
Yeah, that is a plus point. And I think that, I dare I say it, I just had the most fabulous birthday present from Thunder Fairy here with us today. Yesterday was my birthday and arrived in the morning a climbing rose, which is on my must-have want list. And it was called Sakiwaka.
Okay, what does that do?
Sakiwaka is a repeat flowering climbing rose of moderate vigor. And it is most glorious mid pink, but it has old-fashioned cup-shaped flowers like like Granny's roses.
Yes, lovely.
And the right kind of. I mean, the one thing about Austin roses, most of them, not all of them, but most of them, the greater majority of them, the palette is right for the English light, which is
that's true. Yes, gentle.
Yeah, exactly that. We are not California.
No, exactly. So I've got a bit of a yearning at the moment for bright red roses on a black. There was a very undistinguished shed at the bottom of the garden, and the builder's dad, Roger, Henry, and I have had the most wonderful time making it into a sort of escape. It's I had to say at the beginning of the lockdown, it was highly likely I'd end up with no money at all, and I love the thought that it's okay, it's fine. I'll go and live in the shed in the garden. and so Roger saw to it that it was going to be very nice down there in quite a sort of primitive way. And it's all, at the end, it's painted black. And I really love the idea of bright red roses on black. And my geraniums.
Exactly.
All, in their pots all around the door. It's got a sort of ramshackle veranda on the front. So I think
there's a wonderful climbing rose which has single messy flowers called Bengal Crimson, or sometimes called Crimson Bengal, and it flowers forever. The great thing is that often on the coast or close to the Norfolk coast where we're living, our winters are not that severe. And in severe winters, if you're not too handy with the secateurs, and you just already told us that you can't bear to cut your geraniums back, you probably won't bear to cut Crimson Bengal back because it will flower right the way through the year. And it is a lovely...
My goodness. Okay, well, that's a really great tip. Thank you very much. And I will tell you how I get on with it. Where would I get it from?
If you pay the garden a visit, I shall give you one as a present.
Oh, well, that's a very, very nice thought. I'm longing to pay you a visit. But don't worry, I'll do plenty of shopping, whatever happens. I can feel it. My pent-up shopping. desire. It's all very well being all Quaker and austere about it and saying, I'll take what I can find on stalls by the side of the road. I am absolutely longing to have one really good go.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And we'll all find inspiration wherever we can, because we try and take the dog on a variety of walks around our village. You know, we've explored every footpath possible. But in the end, especially when you're busy and you're working and just nip out for a quick lunchtime walk, we just go around the streets of the village I live in. And there's a very sort of unsuspecting, unexciting house. It's a little bit derelict. But the front lawn, I think because no one tends the garden anymore, is just an absolute carpet of crocus at the minute. They've naturalized throughout the lawn. And it's every day I just see it and I think, oh, if only I could get crocuses into this lawn here, which is the garden is divided into the flower beds, which are mine, and the lawn, which is my other halves. I'm trying to steal bits of the lawn when he's not looking. But if I could get crocuses through that lawn, it's not a very exciting Flomo. It's not a very exotic Flomo, but
I know what you mean. When you see a really established thing, there was a garden like that it still is in Jericho in Oxford. We all used to go and dangle over the wall at this time of year, but actually throughout, it's marvelous. And there are people living in the house, but I think, they've done marvelous gardening. Now they're old, and it's got that beautiful kind of negligent look of slight neglect, which actually is my complete ideal. And the trouble with that, lawns are just if I didn't mow here, because it's very, very thin soil, I think it would be just a sea of wildflowers. There is incredible scabious grows in the bit that I don't cut. And what's trying to come up all the time, last summer, the lawn was full of moon daisies, which eventually I asked Peter when he was mowing to swerve round them. I loved them so much. And if one of my daughters is very asthmatic, and she says, Mummy, you've got to cut the grass, because when you don't, it makes me sneeze so much. But if it wasn't for her, I think I would be inclined not to cut the grass at all. I'd miss the croquet, but not much. Brings out the worst.
Prior to having some crocuses that will seed for you all over the garden, get Crocus tommasinianus. I mean, you get plain tommasinianus, but there's tommasinianus in various colors. There's a purple one, there's a white one, there's a rose-colored one, and they are the darling little things that self-seed all over the place. They're the ones to have.
Yes, one that'll naturalize. And which of the snowdrops will do that? Because you see, sometimes they really take, don't they? And some of them
they're not so good in a thin soil, Emma. I think that snowdrops rather like a slightly heavier soil, and they also like a soil that doesn't necessarily dry out in the summer. So they quite like to be. They don't mind being dried out when they're dormant, but they'd like the moisture. They like woodland conditions.
Of course they do, really, don't they? They want to be in leaf mold under the trees. I'll try them down the bottom.
Look at Lexham Hall, where they have those wonderful sheets and sheets of them. I mean, that's thanks to the Victorian forefathers that planted them.
Yes, one's got. Yeah, we have to know. Sometimes you can't have it yourself. You go and enjoy someone else's, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
And if you want to get sucked into the expensive world of galanthophiles, a couple of podcasts back, we talked to Val Bourne, the wonderful writer, and Brian Ellis, who sells snowdrops. We'd covered, I think, over 45 different varieties to set your heart aflutter and make you want to sort of start collecting them. But only do that if you're willing to start parting with hundreds of pounds.
I think I will just take myself off to look at other people's. I'll just fool myself. I think one's torn between wanting everything and wanting to do what works sort of where you are. That's the thing, isn't it? There's no point really trying to make things grow that are going to hate your soil and situation.
None at all. Go with the flow, as they say, and what your soil in your garden tells you to do.
Yeah, it's the only way, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
Now, Alan, so I've got a bit of crocus Flomo, and we've got all manner of Flomo of fruit trees and roses from Emma. What's your Flomo this week?
Well, it's a Daphne that I heard about only 2 days ago. I mentioned earlier that Daphne odora Aureomarginata I met at Lanhydrock House in Cornwall, or she met me. The scent assaulted my olfactory senses, and I just had to find out from whence it came. And the one thing that I slightly niggles me about Daphne odora Aureomarginata is the fact that there's Aureomarginata, which means that the leaves have a yellow edge, and they kind of clash with that pink flower. Now I've got a plain green leaf form with a pink flower, but there is a form of Daphne odora Aureomarginata which has white flowers. Now that wouldn't offend me at all, because the white and yellow I would love to have. And it rejoices under the name of Daphne odora Aureomarginata Sakiwaka.
I think you're pulling our legs.
I'm not. It's Sakiwaka. Sakiwaka. But yes, I think that will make an appearance in the garden here. And I have been online looking for it. And of course, everyone's sold out. That's partly lockdown and partly the fact that it's quite rare, I think.
Do we imagine that all this raging, rampaging purchasing online and in the garden centres when they were briefly open, do you think all these plants have died, or is there some terrific gardening going on out there? What's your sense? What happened last year?
I think it's some and some, because we had such a lovely summer, and some of the plants that were bought, they won't have been watered enough. I mean, if they're bought by people who don't know what they're doing, they give them what I would say a cup of water when they need 2 gallons, and that kind of thing. So there'll be some plants that have suffered, but I mean, I'm sure there will be quite a lot that have succeeded. And it's only going to have to take one little bit of success that will encourage somebody to branch out and become a better gardener.
I agree. It totally. One success really cheers one along, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it's like children. I mean, give them a nasturtium to grow from seed, or give them some radishes to grow from seed. Anything that's quick, or cress. Do you remember growing cress on an old piece of flannel on the meat?
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely loved it. In fact, I had a terracotta hedgehog. It was rather a nice thing.
I remember those.
You soaked it. You had, in the end, I think he was draped with loo paper, because otherwise the seeds it wasn't quite sort of shirred enough. Didn't hold the seeds properly.
Well, talking of seeds, I think it was a good friend of ours, Richard Hobbs, a botanist who does sell seeds, who was talking to another seed seller once, who said, well, I don't know what happens to 80% of the seeds we sell, but clearly they're not being grown, or we'd all be swamped by all the plants we're selling.
And actually, did you both find yourself joining in? One of the ways I got over the absolute absence of seeds in any of the shops was various friends would post a few of theirs, because you never do use them all, do you? No. And I remembered that. And in fact, Matthew was very kind. He sent us quite a sort of emergency package of salads and radishes right at the beginning, and said, get planting.
Yeah, I sent Alan some chili and glory vine, and I sent my friend little pinches of seeds as well. So I think there was quite a lot of seed swapping, and I hope there's more of it. Seed swaps must be one of the most exciting things going.
It's a really good idea, isn't it? It's it's really worth promulgating.
Yeah. I cannot believe we've talked for ages, and I've enjoyed every single second of it, Emma. It's been such a treat. I feel like we've only scratched the surface. There was so much to talk about.
It's been so nice. Thank you both so much.
Not at all. Thank you for your company. It's been enchanting.
Yeah.
Really, really nice. I can't wait to come to East Ruston. I will look on your website to see what date in April, but I'll be there.
Okay.
With bells on.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, and come again. And happy gardening.
Happy gardening.
Bye.
You like my shawl?
I do love your shawl, yes.
I
Brilliant.
finished it. Ah, there we go.
Ah, can you hear me?
I can.
Very good hairdo.
Yeah, she always has hilarious hair, don't you? Yeah, and quite the moustache.
Don't worry.
You've been popular.
I'm doing a podcast.
It happens on the news at 10 these days, doesn't it? So, you're very up there. At least, Alan, you didn't turn into a cat like that American judge.
No, exactly, yes.
I'm going to get in there and meddle with Alan's Zoom, set it up so the next time we do one of these, there they are.